This is Boxing Media Hub live from Cincinnati, Ohio, here in the United States. It is the debut edition of the Fighter Series. I am Serhan Dayi, and I will talk about one of the premier Cincinnati icons, whoever laced him up here. And when it comes to the sport of boxing, we are talking about the great Ezzard Charles. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever part of the world you may be, and we welcome you to the Boxing Media Hub's first ever edition of the uh, Fighter Series, where we took a look at some of the greatest fighters who ever laced up the gloves. This, my name is Serhan Dayi. I come to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, here in the United States. And today's topic happens to be none other than one of the premier fighters, maybe premier athletes to ever come out of Cincinnati, Ohio, none other than the Cincinnati Cobra, Ezzard Charles. Widely regarded as the greatest light heavyweight of all time. You're talking about Ezzard Charles as a fighter who fought, his career expanded 19 years from 1940 to 1959. Basically, spanned 3 divisions. Back then, you got to remember, it's the old school 8 in the boxing divisions. We talk about middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight. Standout career, had many, many great wins in his career. When we talk about this, first, I'm going to talk before his career. I'm going to talk about his impact here in Cincinnati, which is not just in the ring, but also outside of it. At one time, the guy was a jazz musician who promoted community responsibility as well as positivity in the city and education at a time when Cincinnati didn't have any real standout guys. And he was also a stand-up guy who conducted himself as a first-class citizen at a time when this particular sensitive issues were rampant in the sport of boxing. He extended himself to the number 2 rate light heavyweight of all the second rate light heavyweight at the time. The only reason why he didn't get the title shot was because the number 1 contender, who was Billy Fox, was controlled by the mob. And as we all know, there was a time when crime mobs controlled the sport of boxing, and because they had control of the sport, they didn't allow a guy like Ezzard Charles, who took the hard road to get to that spot, to become the number 1 contender and get a title shot. However, he does have some massive standout victories in his career. When you think about his 4 wins over Jimmy Bivens, his 3 wins over Archie Moore, which really was a standout of his light heavyweight tenure. And he also has great wins over fighters like Teddy Yarbrough, Charlie Burley, and Joey Maxim, which everybody knows Joey Maxim for his big win over Sugar Ray Robinson. A stellar light heavyweight career. Because he didn't get a title shot at light heavyweight, despite how hard he worked and pushed for it, there's also other reasons for it. He ventured up to the heavyweight division. Remember, this is at a time when we had the one belt era, where one belt was winner take all, and in the light heavyweight division, because he didn't get a title shot, he moved up to heavyweight and challenged Jersey Joe Walcott for the title and got a unanimous decision win in the first of a 4-fight series. At that time, it was becoming a part of a 4-fight divisional, almost like a 4 kings period from 1947 to 1954. When we talk about Ezzard Charles, Jersey Joe Walcott, Joe Louis, and Rocky Marciano. Walcott got the win over Jersey Joe Walcott, eventually got a second win before he challenged Joe Louis, a faded Joe Louis who had come out of retirement and had to because he was under IRS investigations. He got the big win on a unanimous decision. And basically, after that one, he got the 3rd fight with Jersey Joe Walcott and lost. And then proceeded to an eventual 4th fight where Walcott won that one. So the series there was basically 2-2. So, but Ezzard Charles would get 2 more world title shots at the great Rocky Marciano. The first fight, he was stopped in the 8th round. But in the second fight, he was the only fighter during Rocky Marciano's reign to take Rocky Marciano the full 15-round distance. Actually had his moments in that particular fight where he would hit Rocky Marciano a few times in the nose to where he was busted up pretty good, and many thought the fight was going to be stopped because for a minute, Ezzard Charles actually had Rocky Marciano going. But Rocky Marciano, of course, persevered and won the unanimous decision. But we talk about Ezzard Charles, one of the more unique fight styles he ever had. You're talking about a guy who would like to lean to your right, body off to not allow himself to get hit, as he would mix it up on the inside. Very, very, very strong puncher on the inside. But as his career went along as he got older, he eventually became a better counter puncher, but more of a slickster in that ring, which is common. We talk about his third fight with Archie Moore, where he timed the perfectly counter right hand and put Moore to sleep. Ezzard Charles was himself basically his high ring, his in ring IQ, as well as his counter punching and his smooth style, was why he was able to transcend from middleweight to light heavyweight to heavyweight and was able to have the success he had. You're talking about a 19-year career that expanded 3 weight divisions. If you talk about his career accolades, of course, he went to the Hall of Fame in 1990. You're talking about a fighter who was widely regarded as the greatest light heavyweight of all time. Of course, some people would put Archie Moore in there, maybe even a Billy Conn, throwing a guys like a Michael Spinks or even a Bob Foster. But when you consider the totality of Ezzard Charles' career and Ezzard Charles' peak, maybe he probably gets a nod over all of them. Maybe Billy Conn, you could make his Conn had the greater peak, but Charles had the longer peak, and that's where Ezzard Charles, among many of the career aficionados, takes this realm. We talk about the greatest light heavyweight of all time. Of course, he has had a solid run as a heavyweight, as I mentioned, when he beat Jersey Joe Walcott twice and Joe Louis, albeit it was a faded Joe Louis. But his impact in the boxing world, but here in Cincinnati, is basically well known and definitely well respected. We talk about how he was outside the ring. You know, his love for jazz music prompted him to be a stellar and great jazz musician over here, to where he was basically beloved over here. Now he has a say how much of an icon he is over here. He had a street named after him, Ezzard Charles Drive. He has a mural, literally like the size, like almost like 50 feet long by 60 feet wide. It's in the central part of a complex over here in Cincinnati, where he was the standout Cincinnati icon over here. Also, as recently as 2022, a smaller park, knowing what Ezzard Charles stood for, named it after him. It became Lowell Park, which now became Ezzard Charles Park, and it's still one of the better, smaller parks in that part of West Side Cincinnati. It's one of the biggest one. I got a comment here. The Cobra, yes, absolutely. Bruce Gasson, we pronounce it. It was the Cobra. Oh yes, he was a Cobra in his day. Ezzard Charles, he certainly is a legend. Maybe the number one legend here in Cincinnati when you think about it, simply because, you know. But thank you very much. I appreciate that. You're my guy for good, for good and for life. Ezzard Charles is all over the west side of Cincinnati. Where do we go? The street, it even has an apartment complex named after him, which I did not know that until I toured down there back in November, because I had a chance to venture around there in Cincinnati and see just the overall impact that he has. I mean, to have everybody knows about the street. Nobody knows about the other stuff here. But when you look at the totality of what Ezzard Charles was in Cincinnati, it's second to none. And I get asked this a lot, especially from people who don't know much about the Cincinnati athletes and the Cincinnati sports. And I said all along, this guy is, we talk about the premier Cincinnati icons. He's a cream of the crop. I mean, when you have a park, a set of apartments, a road, and a 50-foot by 60-foot mural named, actually, I mean, kind of say 50 by 60 mural spray painted after you, for you. That's all I needed to know about his impact. All-time great light heavyweight, probably the greatest ever. Some people put Archie Moore, but let me remind you, his 3 wins over Moore put him over him almost by virtual default, and he had the greater peak. Now, due to wild circumstances, he was unable to get the title shot, as I mentioned, but simply because he was a standout icon and made a great impact, Ezzard Charles is going to get the tip of the iceberg, because his resumes at light heavyweight was second to none. Of course, at the time, it's also brought up that he had changed managers, which didn't help his cause, which they forked out $50,000 to try and get a title shot on 2 separate occasions that never materialized. Let me remind you, back then, $50,000 back then is probably like the equivalent of $2 to $3 million today. I mean, mind you, this is back in the 40s and 50s when he tried to get this title shot, and $50,000 back then, you were basically breaking the bank. I mean, they tried to get a title shot, they wouldn't get it. That's why Charles went to move to heavyweight and become the one belt undisputed heavyweight champion. The one belt era, where one belt was winner take all. That was Ezzard Charles. And we talk about some of the icons, boxing icons here in Cincinnati with him. Maybe there's only two that stood out: Ezzard Charles, and of course, a guy I'm going to talk about here the next time, another Cincinnati icon, the great Aaron Pryor. But Ezzard Charles' legacy stands out, bar none, among all the great people and the great athletes to come out of Cincinnati. And you talk about probably the greatest light heavyweight of all time. His resume record speaks for itself. The guy was just nothing short of sensational. The guy was nothing short of phenomenal. I mean, the overall record speaks for itself. Let me remind you, people put too much stock into records. This was at a time when fighters were fighting almost once a month, sometimes twice, even three times a month. Ezzard Charles basically was one of the more active fighters at that time, as he was persevering and pursuing for his spot among the all-time great light heavyweights. The guy was absolutely sensational. Now to slowly wrap this up, I've been asked this before. We talk about the overall totality of Cincinnati sports, because a lot of people don't know much, just like, say, some of the other countries or states when it comes to fighters or athletes. At a deep-rooted talent we've had here in Cincinnati, Ezzard Charles will always be number one. A lot of people are going to throw Oscar Robertson up there, well understood. Aaron Pryor, guys like Anthony Munoz, Ken Anderson in the NFL, Barry Larkin, Johnny Bench, Ken Griffey Sr., and Joe Morgan when it comes to baseball. And maybe the most recent one is our soccer's Luciano Lucho Acosta, FC Cincinnati. None of those can hold a candlelight to the impact that Ezzard Charles had, because his impact was simply outstanding, second to none, and simply the cream of the crop, the greatest Cincinnati icon, and the greatest. Tony Tubbs was a pretty darn good one too, but never got to that level. Ezzard Charles was just way up there, while everybody else is down here. That's what Ezzard Charles was, and always will be all about. So this is the debut edition of the Fighter Series. My name is Serhan Dayi, coming from Cincinnati, Ohio. I greatly appreciate you guys coming to our show. And until the next time, I look forward to seeing you guys then. Take care of yourselves, and good night.